Hi everyone, FIDE Master Dennis Monokroussos here, and today we're going to take a look at another quick game, but one which is much lighter and purely tactical and a lot of fun really. So I played this game recently online, just a 5-minute game, but I think you'll enjoy it and maybe even learn something from it too. Okay, so I had white and I played d4, not my usual move, but every now and then you need a little variety. So d5, c4, d takes c4, Queen's Gambit accepted. Relatively rare opening. Not a bad opening or an incorrect opening certainly, but one that is well, I would say it's not the most popular of openings certainly, but it's an important one, and of course if you play d4 you have to know something about it. All right, so knight f3, knight f6, e3, e6, takes, or well pushes. All right, all this is well known. Bishop to b3 has been the main move here for some years now. Knight b to d7, and here I played a known pawn sack with e4. So the idea is just, well, as with many pawn sacrifices in the opening, to gain time and open lines. So black took, queen e2, knight d to f6, bishop c2. I want to push this knight back, and of course if it goes to d6, then I regain my pawn immediately with very good play. So knight to d6 would be a poor move. Okay, so queen to d5, this is still theory I believe. Rook to e1, so I insist, the knight is leaving, and now knight to c3. Okay, so all this is has been played at least a little bit. I mean, I don't think it's burning up the charts here as far as black's play is concerned, but it has been played before. And actually I looked this up, and in an earlier game black played queen to c6. This was Romanician against Baburin from Linares in 1996. And Romanician played bishop to f4 and got a good game. And then I've also seen analysis that suggests bishop to e3. Anyway, my opponent played queen to h5, and here I thought for a bit, because I knew that, well, I mean, of course I know that I want to finish developing my pieces here, but if I bring this bishop from c1 out, it's not really so clear that it's got a great square. So for example, if I go to f4, I mean, this is a nice square, but I don't really want to allow c takes d4 and then trade queens. I mean, this is kind of unpleasant. I mean, it lets my opponent off the hook to some extent. I'm still ahead in development, but it's a lot harder to whip up an attack like this in a somewhat closed game with queens off the board. Likewise, if I play with like bishop to e3, so that way I can at least recapture with the bishop and not trade queens. Well, I'm blocking up the E file, so that really didn't seem very appealing to me either. So I decided, well, let's just keep the pace going here, keep the tempo. So d takes c5, queen c5, bishop e3. Of course, my bishop can move, but the point is I'm just trying to develop rapidly here. Maybe my opponent should play queen to h5 here. Just go back to that spot, keeping my knight from jumping to a square like e5. I mean, of course, it would hang a piece, but even leaving that aside, I mean, maybe bishop to d4 first and then knight to e5, it would allow a trade of queens. Again, as we discussed, that isn't really something that I want to allow. So probably I would just play rook a to d1 and keep building here. But, okay, I mean, I think white's certainly better here. I think white has plenty of compensation for the pawn. But it's... the queen might prove annoying for me on h5. All right, instead he went back to c7. I played rook a to d1. Rook a to c1 also deserves consideration. Obviously, setting up this opposition of my rook against his queen on the c file. But I played rook a to d1, more straightforward approach, heading for a kingside attack later on. Okay, he plays bishop to e7. I've got everybody developed, so now I've got to make progress, and it's not going to be with pawn advances. So knight to e5. I mean, let me discuss that a little bit. It's a very open center. All my pieces are clearly clustered in the middle of the board, and they have very open lines. So it's not really a position where there's going to be some kind of pawn lever. I mean, okay, it's possible in some position that maybe after he castles kingside, I could consider something like g4, g5 with my knight on e5. To kick his knight away and then maybe play queen h5 and so on. But that one idea aside, I mean, really everything I'm going to have to do here is with pieces. And, okay, my pieces are all pretty reasonably placed where they are. for basic development, so now it's time to make some progress. So knight e5 is a step in that direction. He castles, and now a second step in that direction is bishop to f4. So I'm kind of, I like to call moves like this quasi-threats because of this, in this case, because of the lineup of my bishop and his queen. So it's not that I'm really threatening anything, but it's very uncomfortable to be on the receiving end of a quasi-threat, because there's always the possibility that some kind of tactical shot is going to be in the air to exploit this. And you just don't want to have your pieces in this kind of opposition for very long. So black could play a move like rook to d8. It's, in fact, probably not a bad move at all, shoring up the knight on d6. But again, the longer you stay in these kind of pins, and here black is sort of walking to a second one a little bit, it's uncomfortable. So he played queen to b6, which is very natural. All right. I think, though, from here, he might already be very close to lost, believe it or not. So it doesn't seem like white should be that far along, but I think he probably is. When I was analyzing this afterward and then checking my analysis and in some cases extending it with the computer would think that, okay, white's a little bit better here, but it's not so bad. But as I would kind of push it along in some variations, I kept finding winning advantages over and over and over again. So anyway, I think in the game I don't think I did anything wrong. I don't know that I would have seen all of the fine points, certainly, if my opponent had put up more resistance. But at least I'm happy that I played well given the moves that I actually did face. Anyway, what do you think white should do here? So this is a good moment to start trying to guess my moves. What should white to play do? Well, the move I chose is a very natural and standard idea. So I don't care about the b pawn. Well, actually, right now he isn't threatening it, because if he takes on b2, I have bishop takes h7 check, and then queen takes b2. But he is threatening it after my next move, which is simply rook to d3. So this basic idea of the rook lift. I'm going to bring the rook across to g3 or to h3 and threaten even more mayhem against his king. And see, the problem for black is that, sure, he's up a pawn, but, I mean, who cares at this point? The endgame is a long, long, long way off. And what is important is how many pieces I can bring over to his king. So you can see, I mean, this rook is going to be involved. This bishop is pointing on this diagonal. This bishop is in the general area as well. My knight is not too far away. My queen can come to h5 in some variations. So you can see, I mean, there's just a swarm. It's going to be a plague of white pieces befalling the black king side. Whereas what has he got? I mean, he's got his knight on f6, the bishop on e6. Okay, the rook on f8 really isn't there. I mean, it defends f7, but that's about it. And in fact, in some ways, it can help me by helping to lock in his king, as we'll see later on. This knight on d6 can come to f5, so it's not too far from the crucial area. But he's playing without this bishop on c8, without this rook on a8, and even the queen on b6 isn't really of much use. On the other hand, if it were on the king side, it would probably just get destroyed by the swarm of my own pieces all pointing in that direction. So black is in real trouble here. So he's got 3 or 4 pieces that really aren't doing an awful lot to help his king survive. Okay, let me get rid of all of the Crayola here. All right, well, what should black do in response to this? Well, one move that seems pretty natural is knight to f5. Okay, so this looks pretty good. It brings the piece towards the king side. It blocks my bishop on c2, but I've just got so much stuff here. So rook to h3, and now, for example, if he plays queen takes b2, if he doesn't play it, that might be a spot for me to play this g4, g5 idea that I mentioned earlier. So g4, g5, queen h5, and black is in big danger of getting blown off the board. So by taking on b2, what black is trying here is not so much to win the second pawn, but to kind of kick the props out from my queen side. So now my bishop can't move because there would be a trade of queens, and my knight is a little bit loose on c3. So that's really the aim here. But with rook to b1, queen a3 is forced, and now knight to e4, discovering an attack on his queen. he's got some real troubles. Okay, so let's see first of all what happens on queen takes a2. And actually, again, let me invite you guys to figure out what happens. So it's a fairly simple tactic, but what is it? So white can win a piece here with a relatively simple combination. Okay, the answer is this. Knight takes f6, check. It's got to recapture. Bishop takes f5, and now I'm attacking his queen with my queen. And after queen takes e2, I check on h7, retreat the bishop, and take the queen, and I'm up a piece. Okay, for a couple of pawns, but the pawns are really no factor. My pieces are still dominant, and his queenside really poses no problem for me at all. So white's winning here. Okay, after knight to e4, we just saw queen takes a2 loses. Unfortunately for black, there doesn't really seem to be anything that's better. If he plays queen a5, for instance, well, I do the same thing. Takes, and once again bishop f5. Now the point isn't to win material, but rather to give mate. So e takes f5, queen h5, and black is dead. The threat, of course, is queen takes h7. If he moves the rook, I have not only queen takes f7, but maybe queen takes f7. In fact, that would just be mate in 2. So rook to d8, queen f7, king over, knight to g6 is mate. And if h6, obviously, no real points for this one. Bishop takes h6 is crushing. So if g6, knight g6 is terminal. If he plays g takes h6, then queen h6 is, of course, mating, threatening queen h7. And if he moves the rook over, we have this mating pattern. Pretty common one. And finally, after bishop takes h6, if he takes my knight, whichever way, I don't think it matters, bishop takes g7 is the killer here. So threatening queen h8 mate, which prevents him from getting out with moving his rook. And of course, if he takes on g7 with the bishop or with the king, queen h7 is mate. So going back here, knight f5 is not going to save his bacon. Well, my opponent tried knight to b5 instead. And okay, again, it's decision time. So he'd like to swap swap pieces. The more, the merrier. Also, by getting rid of my knight, maybe in some positions he can play knight to d5. Though moving the knight away from f6 is a prescription for trouble too. Anyway, what should I do here? Should I play knight to e4, knight a4, something else? What do I do? Okay, there's probably any number of decent moves. I chose knight takes b5. Again, to not slow the pace of the attack. He played queen takes b5, and okay, now what? Okay, well, queen takes b5 prevents me from moving my rook over straight away, which obviously is something that I really want to do. It's the whole point of rook to d3. But if I do it here, it allows an exchange of queens, and that's going to let him off the hook. Well, one idea that you might think of is to play bishop to g5. And the threat here seems to be something like this. Bishop takes f6, bishop f6, rook h3. And again we saw, okay, if queen takes e2, we can take this, and then I can either retreat the bishop and take, or play rook takes e2 straight away. And white is a good deal better here. However, after rook to h3, it looks like black can probably get away with g6. If I were immediately ready to sacrifice twice on g6 and then take a third time with the queen or a rook or something like that, then I think I would be in good shape. But it doesn't look like I have time here. And meanwhile, I'm down a pawn, and black is threatening to just liquidate a couple of sets of pieces. So this is really not so good for me. And that's even giving me an extra move, too. So bishop to g5 is probably not the most incisive way to play. So instead I chose a4. I want to kick his queen away and then get my rook into the action as fast as possible. Alright, well here my opponent played queen to b4, but instead queen takes b2 is quite interesting. Certainly it looks very, very dangerous, and it is very dangerous, and in fact white can win against this, but it's not, let's say, self-evident how white does it. So once again, this is a good place to stop the recording and fish around and see what you can find. There are a number of good ways to proceed, but well, it's worth trying to figure them out. Okay. Well, one way to go is with rook to b1. I don't think this wins, though. I think certainly I'm better. I have full compensation and more. But after, let's say, queen a2, rook to d2, g6, I don't think I'm winning here. So it's certainly a position that I prefer. After g3, for instance, white has a serious advantage and a strong initiative, but no win. Rook to h3, though, is stronger. All right, so this one maybe, well, actually, this one's not fully clear either. Okay, so rook to h3 threatens bishop h7 and winning the queen. Black should play g6. And now, one way that white can continue is with bishop to h6, rook to d8, and knight takes f7. And the point here is that after king takes f7, bishop g6 is a winner. Winner, winner, chicken dinner. I take the queen x move. But if black decides not to be so cooperative and plays something like rook to d5 instead, the position is still pretty unclear. The rook can come to h5 next and kind of shut things down over there. So this is no clear victory for me either. What does seem to be a win is rook to g3. So first rook to g3, threatening bishop h6, threatening bishop takes h7 check and queen takes queen. And after king to h8, only now, also, of course, after rook to g3, g6 is just terrible here, because once again I can play bishop to g6. Queen takes, bishop takes f7 check if nothing else, and because it's double check, and then rook takes queen, and here I'm not even down any material, and the attack is going to rage on. Bishop h6 is coming, and so on. Okay, and if king to h8, now rook to h3. So this makes all the difference in the world here. Okay, black is probably best off getting out of the way of all of these discovered possibilities. Okay, now bishop to d2, saving my bishop, and again doing so with tempo. Queen c5, and now bishop h7 is just a killing blow. If he doesn't take, he's lost, and if he does take, he's lost. So knight h7, queen h5, threatening queen h7 mate, of course, queen c2, knight d3, and he's got to cough up the queen to avoid mate, and he's probably going to get mated pretty quickly anyway. So this is winning, and winning with a big margin. Lots of room to spare. So going back to the position here, after a4, as I said, he played queen to b4. Okay, bishop to g5 is a reasonable move here. I'm certainly better after this, but I chose bishop to d2 instead. So just doing everything with tempo. I want to get my rook lift. All right, so now black again has a choice. And again, he refrained from taking the pawn on b2 and played instead queen to b6. But let's look at queen takes b2, see how this goes. Here, of course, I intended to play bishop to c3, putting my bishop on a second long diagonal, while, of course, hitting his queen, so I'm doing it with tempo, and obviously also I'm protecting my bishop on c2. Alright, queen to b6 is the only move that makes any sense here. And once again, rook to h3 is possible, but maybe rook to g3 could be even better. And now black is in, well, I think he's beyond trouble. He's losing. But let's see the variations, because they're both very nice. The two natural moves here for black are h6 and g6. Let's see what happens after each of them. Okay, if g6, white simply plays the quiet queen to d2, aiming for h6, followed by a big explosion on g6. Okay, easily said, not easily met. Also, it's important to note that queen to d2 prevents bishop to b4, so black doesn't have the chance to swap off my very dangerous dark squared bishop. Alright, so let's see what happens on bishop to c5. So this looks like this would impede queen to h6, because black will have not only bishop takes f2 check, but even maybe bishop to d4 to blunt this bishop on c3. Well, why not stop the recording here and see if you can figure out if that's really true? Does queen h6 trump all of that stuff, or doesn't it? And if it doesn't, then what else can I play? Well, the answer, of course, is that queen h6 does trump it. So, I mean, I've got, again, every single piece in the attack except maybe for the rook on e1. And even in some lines, that guy will help out too. But even leaving out the rook on e1, I mean, I've got my queen, the rook on g3, the knight on e5, and both bishops operating on all cylinders here, while he only has the knight on f6 that's doing any defensive work at all, other than the pawns. So if bishop takes f2, king h1, bishop takes g3, what's the crusher here? Of course, I could probably just take the bishop back and with so many attacking forces still win, but there's a very nice, just crushing move here. Knight to d7. Alright, I'm threatening to take on f6 with the knight or with the bishop, and I also have the threat of queen takes f8 mate. So he can stop two of those threats with bishop takes d7, but after bishop f6, there's no answer to queen g7 mate. So that's the end. Okay, I mean, he's up a lot of material. He's up a rook and 3 pawns, and if he takes on e1, he's going to be up 2 rooks and 3 pawns, but of course the name of the game is checkmate. Alright, so bishop f2 is hopeless. If he plays bishop to d4, or maybe bishop f2 check and then bishop to d4, then the g6 sacrifice is decisive. So bishop g6, knight g6 also wins, fg6, knight g6, so we make the second sack. Now let's say he plays bishop f2, king h1, queen d8. Okay, everything wins here. Rook to g5 is perhaps the most efficient of the wins, but alright, the threats are numerous. Knight to e7, knight to e5 check, and then queen g7. You name it. I mean, it's black is gone here. So g6 is not going to save the day. Well, how about h6? Okay, well, once again, let me invite you to figure out what's wrong with this move for yourselves. It's, again, very nice. Once more, probably there are a number of ways that white can proceed here. That'll be quite good. But knight to d7 is an especially elegant concluding move. So, threatening, of course, the queen, threatening the rook, and threatening to take twice on f6. So once more, bishop takes d7 is forced. Knight takes d7 is not really worth considering because of rook g7 check. And this leads to a little staircase mate, if nothing else, like that. So bishop takes d7 is the only move that's really sensible. But now what? Okay, I opened up the diagonal for my bishop, but what's the point of doing that? Well, the answer? Rook takes g7 check. Okay, again, if he plays king to h8, then I've got, well, a million things there. Rook h7 check, and then, yeah, so I'll show you. This is one nice way to finish the job. Rook h7. He can't take the rook either way. And now queen to g4 check, knight takes queen, and rook to h8 mate. So it's a very pretty little mating pattern. So black might as well grab the rook. Okay, and now queen g4 check. Very important to force him there first, because if we play queen to e4 straight away, that gives him the chance to use the rook both to stop my check on h7 and to let his king escape via f8. So the right way is queen g4 check first. Of course, he can't take because the knight's pinned. And after king h8, now queen to e4. And there's no defense to queen h7 mate. He can delay it for a couple of moves, but that's it. Okay. So that's a very nice set of variations on h6 here. Alright, and this all goes back to him playing queen takes b2. But my opponent did not play queen takes b2. He played queen to b6 instead. Okay, well now finally I got to make my rook lift with rook to h3. And okay, I have plenty of threats here. The most obvious and immediate one is, so hopefully you can figure it out before I say it, bishop takes h7 check. And on knight h7, queen h5, and he gets mated on h7 or h8. Oops. Like that. Okay, so pretty clearly he either has to play h6 or g6, and those are really the options. Okay, he played g6 in the game, so let's take a look at h6 now. And I'm pretty sure that all of you will immediately know what white should do here against that. And the answer, of course, is bishop takes h6. So that one's a pretty natural sack. Okay, g takes h6. And here there are a couple of follow-ups that are reasonable. I'll have to ignore the phone here. Sorry about that. A couple of reasonable follow-ups. One is the obvious rook takes h6, but even better is queen to d2. Sorry about the phone call there. So queen to d2 hits the pawn on h6, and the problem for black is that he really can't defend it. The best try is knight to e4. And now there's a really attractive way to finish the game. So rook takes e4, bishop to g5, and now what should white do? Once more, there are just many, many ways to win, but a very pretty way to finish is with rook takes h6. Okay, the basic tactical justification is that on bishop takes d2, rook to g4 check, and then there's mate next move. Very nice. Okay, so black should try queen to d8, and here it's just a prosaic finish. So no whiz-bang mate. Maybe there's one, but I didn't see one. But queen takes d8, rook takes d8. Of course, again, not bishop takes, because then rook g4 check is mating. But rook takes, and then rook to g4, and white's going to win a piece, because if f6 doesn't help, we just take it. So the bishop's going to fall, and white's going to be up a piece and a pawn then, with a great game as well, and nothing to worry about. All right, so, oh, and just to point out, so we don't have to worry about black regaining the piece with rook to d2 at some point, with the idea that the bishop can't move because of rook to d1 mate, because then white will have bishop to b3, and yeah, I mean that'll take care of everything. So no real worries in that department either. All right, so back to the game. Rook to h3. We just saw what happens on h6. If g6, well, here this was kind of an interesting moment in the game. So, of course, I wanted to put my bishop on d2 someplace useful, and c3 came to mind. But then I thought, well, gee, if I play bishop to c3, then he's got knight to d5, and that's kind of uncomfortable. Then I also realized, well, on the other hand, his bringing his knight away from f6 is pretty dangerous. It's not necessarily such a good idea for him to do that. And then I was able to realize just what would happen in that situation. So see if you could figure out after bishop to c3 what white has after knight to d5. Maybe white has many things again, but what's best? Okay. Well, I played bishop to c3, as I said, and before we look at knight to d5, we should also consider bishop to b4, again with the logical idea of trying to swap off this very, very dangerous bishop. Well, here I think white wins, not by any kind of immediate tactical shot, but simply queen to d2, and after this exchange, the follow-up is going to be either queen to h6, or in some cases queen to g5, and black's very fragile king side is not going to be able to hold together. So white will win there, but I'll leave the specifics to your own analytical work. But let's take a look at knight to d5. Okay, did you figure out what white has here? Well, the answer is queen h5. So kind of a stock tactic, but it's nice to get the chance to actually, play it in a game. So the game ended very quickly. He played g takes h5. I played rook to g3 check. Okay, he made the spite interposition with bishop to g5. I played rook takes g5 check. And then here my opponent was a very gracious loser and just disconnected and forfeited. And I think he waited until his time was just about over as well. So, a very, very class conclusion. Just a little bit of shame. So king h8. Of course, knight takes f7 as mate, or if we want to be a little bit funny, takes an extra move, but it's just to show the tactical possibilities that are inherent in this position. I also have knight to g6, double check, king to g8, and then knight to e7 with another double check that happens to be mate. So all very nice, but let's take a look at some of the other variations here. And in fact, well, they all start with the move knight f6. So what if my opponent had apologized, so to speak, realized that the knight can't afford to be on d5 and had simply gone back? So this looks kind of reasonable. So it protects the h7 pawn, it blocks up the long diagonal, it hits my queen a second time. What do I do now? Now, to be honest, I probably would have just played queen to h6, and this is winning. I'm threatening knight to g4, or again knight to d7, followed by bishop takes f6, and black is going to lose here. I mean, I'm also threatening to sack twice on g6, so I mean, black has no chance here. But there are more elegant ways to finish this than queen h6. So queen h6 is just a very routine and pedestrian move. So if you want to win brilliantly, there are two ways to do so. Okay, a move that I probably would have found in a tournament game, because certainly I've seen this pattern before, is knight to g4. All right, and this is quite nice. It's a little bit more intricate than the usual stock pattern, but not too difficult to work everything out. Okay, so after knight to g4, let's work our way through the variations here. Okay, if knight takes h5, okay, that's simple, no real difficulty there. Knight h6 is mate. Okay, if g takes h5, well, this is where it's a little bit funny, because usually, you know, in these patterns, it's just knight h6 mate, game over. But here, white has time to just play knight takes f6 check. And it feels like black has a little bit of freedom, but he really doesn't. So after king to h8, for instance, rook h5, and there's no good defense to rook to h7, takes h7 mate. I mean, you can play bishop takes f6, but bishop f6, king over, and then either rook to g5 mate, or bishop takes h7 mate. Okay, if bishop takes f6 right away, rook to g3 check. So a nasty little interposition. If the king goes over, then bishop f6 is mate in 1. Rook to g5, rook takes g5 is mate in 1. And on bishop to g7, we have the staircase mate that we looked at in a different context. Like so. Okay, so after knight to g4, the only way for black to even make the game last is the ugly excuse me, queen takes f2 check, with the point that if the knight takes, then there's no more mate, and after king takes, knight g4 check. But okay, I mean, queen takes g4, e5, queen g3, and white's up a queen for 2 pawns with an attack. So this is the only virtue that this line has for black is that it avoids the immediate and showy mates, but it has no other merit. All right, so queen h6 wins, knight to g4 wins. And there's also a third win, and this one I don't think I would have seen, even in a slow game. I mean, I don't think I would have even thought to look. So this third win, actually, as I look at this, I wonder now if knight to g6 wins. Probably not, because f takes g6, bishop g6, and then knight takes the queen. But anyway, the third winning move is also very beautiful, knight c6. And so this gives us some new patterns to play with. Alright, so let's again work our way through all the variations. If g takes h5, then we take the bishop. Okay, if king h8, then bishop f6 is mate, so the king should come up. But once again, although it feels like black has some degree of freedom here, he really doesn't. So rook to g3 check. The knight can't block because it's pinned. If the king goes back in the corner, again, bishop f6 is mate. And if the king goes up, then bishop to d2 is mating. Queen e3, bishop e3 mate. Okay, so that's one variation down after knight to c6. Variation number 2. If knight takes the queen, okay, knight e7 is mate. So that, of course, has to be mentioned. All right, variation 3. What if queen takes c6? So what do I gain other than opening up the long diagonal? Well, that's all, but that's enough. Bishop takes f6, and now the only way to stop the threat of mate on h7, for example, bishop here and queen over. Well, okay, I mean, you can move the rook, but then queen h7 and queen h8 is mate. So the only way to stop that, an h-file mate, is with g takes h5, but then rook to g3 is mate. Okay, so we've looked at both captures of the queen. We've looked at queen takes c6. What else? Well, how about rook to e8, trying to give the king a little bit of clearance here. Well, this one also gets mated. Knight takes e7 check for starters. Okay, now if rook takes, what does white do now? Well, the answer once again is to not worry about the queen, but to open some lines and grab some crucial squares around black's king. So bishop takes f6, g takes h5, rook g3 check, king f8, bishop takes h7, threatening rook to g8 mate. And after king to e8, the rook on e1 finally earns its keep with rook to d1, and it's mate in no more than 2 moves. I mean, black can play something stupid like queen f2 or queen d4. I take the queen and then I give mate. So that's essentially unstoppable. Okay, so that's what happens on rook takes e7. If king f8, well, we basically get the same thing. Bishop takes, and black really has nothing better than to just transpose with this. If he plays rook takes e7, then queen h7 and queen h8 mate. So g takes h5, rook g3 again, rook takes e7, bishop takes h7, and the same mate decides the game. Okay, so we've looked now at both captures of the queen. We looked at queen takes e6, we looked at rook to e8. Finally, that leaves rook to d8. And this, like the queen takes f2 check line against knight to g4, has as its only real virtue that it avoids the immediate forced mate. But again, it's ugly. Again, it leaves white up more than enough material to win the game. So knight takes e7 check, king f8, queen g5, and black has nothing to hope for here. So he's down a piece. He's going to lose more. His king is still in big trouble. White's winning with room to spare. So even after the better knight to f6 in this position, even after knight to f6, white is winning many different ways. But still, it would have been nice to have found or to had the chance to play knight to g4 here. But anyway, the game continuation was quite fun as well, and I certainly can say that I enjoyed the game considerably, especially when I went back and checked the analysis and found even more beautiful lines, and to see also, which is quite nice, that I really didn't miss anything in the game. So it doesn't mean that I saw everything, but at least it's nice that I basically did everything right in the attack. So I enjoyed it. I think it's quite instructive because we got to see so many different mating patterns, so many different ideas, the rook lift, these kind of diversionary tactics as well, and a whole host of sacrificial possibilities. So very entertaining. I think it's a great game if you're a coach, if you give lessons. Games like this I think are quite useful because of all the tactics and patterns that they demonstrate. So thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you again next time. Goodbye.